Brian Reese dribbled the basketball with practiced ease, his eyes fixed on his son, Alex, who stood at the three-point line. Shoulders slumped, Alex's attention wavered between the court and the phone in his hand. The Sunday morning game, once their sacred ritual, had devolved into a reminder of the growing chasm between them. "Alex, heads up," Brian called, passing the ball with perfect precision. The ball bounced off Alex's shoulder, causing him to drop his phone. The teenager's face twisted in anger as he scrambled to check his device for damage. "What the hell, Dad?" Alex snapped, brushing off his phone with exaggerated care. "You could have broken it." Brian maintained his composure, though his jaw tightened imperceptibly. As a criminal defense attorney who'd faced hardened criminals and corrupt officials, he had learned to read people's tells. The way Alex's eyes darted away, the fidgeting with his phone case, these weren't just signs of teenage rebellion. "Language, Alex," Brian warned, his voice carrying the same authority that had made judges pause in their chambers. "We're here to play basketball, not check Instagram." Alex rolled his eyes, a gesture that sent a familiar surge of frustration through Brian's chest. "Whatever, Brian." The use of his first name hit like a physical blow, but Brian didn't flinch. "I got stuff to do anyway. Chemistry homework." "It's Sunday morning," Brian countered, retrieving the ball. "You always do your homework on Friday nights." Alex's left eye twitched slightly. A tell. "People change," Alex muttered, already walking toward the gym exit. "Unlike some people, I've got better things to do than obsess over some stupid game." Brian watched his sons retreating back, his mind cataloging the changes of the past few months. Subtle shifts in vocabulary, new expressions, the deliberate use of Brian instead of Dad. It all pointed to external influence. Someone was rewriting his son's script. At home, Brian found Wana in her home office, surrounded by patient files. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose. The sight of her still stirred something in his chest, even after 17 years of marriage. But lately that feeling was tinged with uncertainty. "Alex left the game early again," Brian said, leaning against the doorframe. He observed her reaction carefully, the slight stiffening of her shoulders, the pause in her writing that lasted a fraction too long. "He's 15, Brian," Wana replied without looking up. "You can't expect him to spend every Sunday playing basketball with his father forever." Her tone was reasonable, professional. The same voice she used with difficult patience. "This controlling behavior of yours is exactly why he's pulling away." "Controlling?" Brian's eyes narrowed slightly. "Since when is wanting to spend time with my son controlling?" Now Wana did look up, her expression a perfect blend of concern and mild exasperation. "You're doing it again, Amor. Analyzing everything like it's one of your cases. Not everything is a conspiracy." She approached him, placing a hand on his chest. "He's just growing up. It's normal." Brian had seen that same disconnect countless times in the courtroom. Defendants trying to appear sincere while lying through their teeth. The observation settled in his gut like cold lead. "Maybe you're right," he conceded, watching her reaction. Relief flickered across her features, too quickly. "I should give him space." "Exactly," Wana said, patting his chest before returning to her desk. "Now I have patient notes to review. We're short-staffed at the clinic this week, so I might be home late tomorrow." Brian nodded, already mentally noting the information for later verification. "Of course. Don't work too hard." That evening, Brian sat in his home office, reviewing case files while monitoring the sounds of the house. Alex's music thumped through the walls. New artists he'd never listened to before. The front door opened and closed as Wana left for her evening yoga class, the third this week despite her usual twice-weekly routine. He opened his laptop and pulled up Alex's recent grade reports. The steady decline was subtle enough that most parents might miss it, but the pattern was clear to his trained eye. His son's English essays showed shifts in writing style and new phrases that didn't match his previous work. Small changes, but significant ones. Brian's phone buzzed with a text from Alex. Going to Matt's house to study. Another tell. Alex usually asked permission, not just announced his plans. The changes were accelerating, becoming more obvious. Someone was systematically dismantling the relationships and habits Brian had built with his son. And they were doing it with professional precision. He picked up a framed photo from his desk. Alex's 13th birthday, just 2 years ago. His son was beaming at the camera, one arm around Brian's waist, the other clutching his first professional basketball. The Alex in that photo wouldn't have missed their Sunday game for homework. That Alex wouldn't have called him Brian. "I'm missing something," he muttered, studying the recent family photos on his wall. Each one told a story of subtle changes. Alex's growing distance, Wana's increasingly practiced smiles, the gradual separation in their positioning. As a defense attorney, Brian had learned that the most damaging betrayals were never sudden. They were slow, methodical, built on countless small deceptions. He turned back to his computer and opened a new document. At the top, he typed, "Behavioral changes. Alex." He began listing his observations with the same meticulous attention to detail that had won him countless cases. Someone was playing a long game, and they'd chosen his family as their target. Hugo McBride shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his fingers drumming an erratic pattern on Brian's office desk. In 15 years as Brian's paralegal, he'd never seen his friend and boss lose a case. But this wasn't about a case, and Hugo knew that personal betrayals cut deeper than any legal battle. "Just tell me, Hugo," Brian said, his voice carrying the same calm authority that had made witnesses crack on the stand. "What did you see?" Hugo took a deep breath, his loyalty to Brian warring with the weight of what he had to share. "I was at Riverside Cafe yesterday, getting lunch." He paused, choosing his words carefully. Wana was there. Brian's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened with predatory focus. "Go on." "She wasn't alone," Hugo continued, watching his friend's reaction. "She was with Jack Aldrich." The name hung in the air like smoke. Brian's fingers stilled on his pen, the only visible reaction to the revelation. Hugo had been there during their law school days and had witnessed the systematic campaign of sabotage that Jack had waged against Brian. The accidentally deleted study materials before the bar exam had just been the culmination of years of subtle undermining. "Tell me everything," Brian commanded, pulling out a legal pad. "Every detail you can remember." Hugo leaned forward, his voice dropping despite the privacy of Brian's office. They were at a corner table, the kind you choose when you don't want to be seen. Body language was intimate. He kept touching her hand, and she wasn't pulling away. He hesitated before adding, "They looked comfortable together, Brian, like it wasn't their first meeting." Brian's pen moved across the pad, recording every word with mechanical precision. What time was this? Around 1:30, her usual clinic lunch hour. Hugo watched as Brian made a note, probably comparing it against Wana's stated schedule. There's more. They were looking at something on Jack's phone. Photos, I think. And Wana. He swallowed hard. She was showing him something on hers. They were laughing. Brian's pen paused. Did you hear what they were discussing? Not much, Hugo admitted. But I heard Alex's name. He met Brian's gaze directly. Jack said something about basketball. About building trust. The pen snapped in Brian's grip, staining his fingers. He regarded the broken pieces with clinical detachment before carefully wiping his hands. Jack Aldrich, he said, the name coming out like a prosecutor's opening statement, hasn't changed his methods, still trying to take what's mine. Hugo remembered the aftermath of the bar exam incident. While others had seen Brian's calm acceptance of Jack's apology as forgiveness, Hugo had recognized it for what it was. Strategic patience. Brian had waited, gathered evidence of Jack's broader misconduct at their firm, and then presented it with devastating precision. Jack's suspension had seemed like karma to most, but Hugo knew better. It had been execution. There's a pattern here, Brian mused, pulling out his phone. He scrolled through something. Photos, Hugo realized. Alex's new attitude. Wana's extra yoga classes. The changes in routine. Jack's always been methodical, but sloppy in the details. What are you going to do? Hugo asked, though he already knew the answer. He'd seen that look in Brian's eyes before, in cases where the truth had been buried under layers of lies and manipulation. Brian's smile was cold, professional. For now, nothing. When you're hunting snakes, Hugo, you don't strike at the first sight of scales. You wait until you can see the whole nest. He turned his computer screen, showing a calendar with highlighted dates and times. Wana has 3 yoga classes scheduled this week. Let's see where she really goes. Hugo hesitated. If you need anything, surveillance, documents, whatever, I'm here. You know that, right? I know, Brian replied, his voice softening slightly. You've always been loyal, Hugo. That's why you're the only one I trust with this. He stood, straightening his tie with practiced precision. For now, keep watching. Document everything. If you see them together again, don't intervene. Just record, photograph, observe. Hugo nodded, recognizing the shift from friend to strategist. And Jack, should we warn him off? No, Brian said, his expression hardening. Let him think he's clever. Let them both think they're winning. He picked up the broken pen, examining the splatter pattern of ink on his legal pad. The best victories aren't won in dramatic confrontations, Hugo. They're won in quiet moments when your opponents are too busy congratulating themselves to notice the noose tightening. As Hugo stood to leave, Brian's voice stopped him at the door. Hugo, he said, his tone even, but carrying an undercurrent of steel. Thank you for being the kind of friend who brings bad news directly. The words were genuine, but there was no mistaking the warning within them. Unlike some people, you understand the value of loyalty. Susanna Gillespie's voice trembled slightly over the phone, her concern setting off alarm bells in Brian's mind. Mr. Reese, she began, I've been teaching high school mathematics for 20 years, and I've learned to trust my instincts about students. Something's wrong with Alex. Brian sat forward in his office chair, his free hand already pulling up a fresh document on his computer. Go on, Mrs. Gillespie. Tell me exactly what's concerning you. It's not just the dropping grades, she continued. Alex has always been one of my best students, but lately he's been different, distant. And today, she paused, clearly trying to gather her thoughts. Today, he said something that worried me deeply. Brian's fingers hovered over the keyboard. What did he say? We were discussing his latest test results, a C-, very unlike him. When I asked if everything was okay at home, another pause. He said his new dad understands him better than his workaholic father ever could. The words hit Brian like a physical blow, though his voice remained steady. His new dad. Did he elaborate? No, but he became very defensive when I asked. Susanna lowered her voice. Last week, I saw a man picking Alex up after basketball practice. Not you. He was tall, well-dressed. They seemed familiar with each other. Brian's jaw tightened. Did you happen to notice what kind of car they left in? A black Mercedes. Newer model. I remember because it had a law firm parking permit in the window. Aldrich and Associates, I think. The pen in Brian's hand creaked under the sudden pressure. Thank you, Mrs. Gillespie. You've been very helpful. One last thing. Has Alex's phone usage during class changed recently? Yes, actually. He's constantly checking it, especially during lunch period. I've had to warn him several times, which isn't like him at all. After ending the call, Brian sat in silence for several minutes, his mind working through the implications. Jack Aldrich wasn't just having an affair with Wana. He was systematically inserting himself into Alex's life, using Brian's own son as a weapon against him. The next hours passed in a blur of focused activity. Brian's fingers flew across his keyboard, documenting every detail while making calls to trusted contacts. By evening, he had everything arranged. The monitoring software for the family computers would be delivered discreetly, and Jackie Muller, his firm's most reliable private investigator, was already running background checks on Jack's recent activities. At home, Brian maintained his usual routine, watching his wife and son with new awareness. Alex barely looked up from his phone during dinner, while Wana chatted about her day with practiced animation. Every gesture, every casual mention of her schedule now carried new weight. "I'm worried about Alex's grades," Brian mentioned carefully, watching Wana's reaction. "Mrs. Gillespie called today." Wana's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "That nosy woman," she said, her tone dismissive. "She should mind her own business. My grades are fine." Alex snapped, still not looking up from his phone. "Just because I'm not perfect like you want me to be, Brian, doesn't mean there's a problem." "I didn't say you had to be perfect," Brian replied evenly, noting how Wana didn't correct Alex's use of his first name. "I said I was worried. There's a difference." "Yeah, right." Alex stood abruptly. "I'm done. Go into my room." "Alex," Wana called after him, her tone indulgent. "Don't forget you have that study group tomorrow after school." Brian watched the exchange with growing certainty. Wana wasn't just failing to support his parental authority. She was actively undermining it. Each small interaction was another brick in the wall being built between him and his son. Later that night, after the house had gone quiet, Brian sat in his home office, methodically installing the monitoring software on their network. Each keystroke felt like another piece of evidence in what he already knew would be a devastating case. His phone buzzed with a text from Jackie Muller. "Background check on Aldrich complete. Found something interesting. Can we meet?" Brian's response was immediate. "My office. Tomorrow, 7 a.m. He turned back to his computer, fingers moving with practiced efficiency as he completed the software installation. The program would log every keystroke, every website visited, every message sent or received on their home network. It wasn't just about gathering evidence anymore. It was about understanding the full scope of the betrayal. A soft knock at his office door made him look up. Alex stood in the doorway, looking younger and more vulnerable than he had at dinner. "Dad." The word slipped out naturally, unlike his earlier forced use of Brian. "Can I talk to you?" Brian carefully kept his expression neutral, though his mind raced with possibilities. "Of course. Come in." Alex shuffled into the room, phone clutched in his hand like a lifeline. I'm sorry about dinner. And basketball. And..." He trailed off, looking lost. "Sit down, son," Brian said gently, watching as Alex sank into the leather chair across from his desk, the same chair where countless clients had sat, seeking protection from those who'd wronged them. "What's on your mind?" Alex's fingers tightened around his phone. "Sometimes I feel like you're disappointed in me. Like I'm not good enough." Brian recognized the words, not his son's natural pattern of speech. Someone had planted this seed, nurtured it. "Alex, look at me." He waited until his son's eyes met his. "You've never disappointed me. Not once. But you're always working," Alex countered, the words carrying an echo of someone else's influence. "You missed my last 3 games." "I was in court," Brian explained, keeping his voice steady despite the anger building in his chest, not at Alex, but at those manipulating him, fighting to keep an innocent man out of prison. "Sometimes our duties have to come before our desires. That's what Mom says," Alex said quickly, correcting himself, "that you always put your cases before family." The slip was telling. Someone was coaching Alex to use their first names to create distance. "Your mother said that." "No, I mean..." Alex looked down at his phone again. "I should go. I have homework." "Alex," Brian called as his son stood to leave. "You know you can tell me anything, right? Anything at all." For a moment, something flickered in Alex's eyes. A desire to speak, to confide. Then his phone buzzed, and the moment shattered. "Yeah, sure. Good night, Dad." After Alex left, Brian sat in the darkness of his office, replaying every word of their conversation. His son was being pulled in multiple directions, manipulated by people who should have been protecting him. But they'd made a crucial mistake. They'd underestimated both Brian's perception and his capacity for retribution. He pulled up his email and began composing a message to his most trusted associates at the firm. The subject line read, "Priority investigation. Personal matter." The message was brief but clear. He needed their best resources, complete discretion, and absolute loyalty. As he worked late into the night, Brian could hear the faint movements in the house. Wana's footsteps in their bedroom, the soft ping of Alex's phone receiving late-night messages. His family was being torn apart by invisible strings, but soon he would expose every puppet and puppeteer. The monitoring software blinked silently on his screen, already logging data. In the morning, he would meet with Jackie Muller and begin assembling the pieces of this puzzle. But for now, he sat in his office, a predator waiting patiently in the darkness, preparing to strike at those who dared to threaten what was his. Jackie Muller spread the surveillance photos across Brian's desk, each image a carefully documented betrayal. Her practiced hands arranged them in chronological order, telling a story that made Brian's jaw clench with controlled fury. "They're not even trying to be subtle anymore," Jackie said, tapping a photo showing Wana and Jack entering a cafe near Alex's school. "Your wife's been meeting him 3 times a week for the past month, always during her supposed clinic hours or yoga classes." Brian picked up one photo, studying the timestamp. "This was taken during Alex's basketball game last Tuesday, the one I couldn't attend because of the Morrison trial." "Exactly." Jackie pulled out her tablet, swiping through a series of text message screenshots. "They're coordinating their movements. Look at this exchange from last week." Brian leaned forward, reading the messages between his wife and his former friend. "Wana, be tied up with the Morrison case. Perfect timing for some quality time with Alex, already near the school. We'll catch him after practice. Cut those basketball stats you sent. Jack, perfect. He's so desperate for a father who gets him." Brian's fingers whitened around the edge of his desk, but his voice remained perfectly controlled. "Show me everything. Every meeting. Every text. Every accidental encounter." Jackie nodded, pulling up more evidence on her tablet. "They've been orchestrating these run-ins for months. Jack shows up at the mall when Wana takes Alex shopping. He happens to be at the same restaurants, the same basketball games. All carefully planned." The monitoring software Brian had installed painted an even darker picture. Screenshots showed Wana sending Jack detailed information about Alex's interests, his schedule, even his frustrations with Brian's work hours. "She's coaching him," Brian observed, his analytical mind cataloging each betrayal. "Teaching him how to manipulate my son." "There's more." Jackie pulled up an audio file. "This was recorded at the cafe yesterday. Your wife wasn't just sharing information. She was actively poisoning Alex against you." The recording played with crystal clarity. Wana's voice, "Your father's always been selfish. Remember last month's science fair? He chose a client meeting over your presentation. That's just who he is, Mio. He cares more about his clients than his family." Alex's response was hesitant. He said it was an important case. Wana cut in sharply. "They're all important cases. That's what he always says. Thank goodness you have Jack now. Someone who actually makes time for you." Brian's expression hardened as he listened to his wife, systematically dismantling his relationship with his son. Each word was calculated, each moment designed to create distance. "The science fair meeting," he said quietly. "That was a bail hearing for a domestic violence victim. I got her away from her abuser that day. Alex knew that. He said he understood. They're using your dedication against you," Jackie observed, "turning your responsibilities into weapons." Brian stood, moving to his office window. His reflection showed the same composed expression he wore in court, but his eyes held the cold fury that had made guilty men confess on the stand. Where else have they been meeting? Jackie pulled up a map on her tablet. I've documented 37 accidental encounters in the past 3 months. The mall, the basketball court, the school parking lot. Jack's been inserting himself into every aspect of Alex's life. She highlighted several locations. These are the most frequent meeting spots. This cafe near the school, the basketball court at the community center, and, she hesitated, and your house, Brian. When you're in court, he's been there at least 6 times in the past month. In my house, Brian repeated, his voice eerily calm. Security footage shows him staying for hours. They're comfortable there. Too comfortable. Brian returned to his desk, examining each piece of evidence with methodical precision. The monitoring software on Alex's devices, what has it shown? Text messages, mostly. Jack playing the role of the understanding mentor. Your dad just doesn't get you like I do. You can talk to me about anything. He's building trust, creating dependency. Brian nodded slowly, his mind already calculating moves and countermoves. And Wana facilitates everything. She's the architect, Jackie confirmed. She tells Jack what to say, how to act, which buttons to push. She's using her psychology background to maximize the impact. My wife, Brian said, the words carrying the weight of finality, has forgotten who she's dealing with. He began organizing the evidence into precise piles. Continue the surveillance. I want every meeting documented, every conversation recorded. And Jackie? Yes. Get me everything you can on Jack's current cases. Every client, every strategy, every potential ethics violation. He's gotten sloppy over the years. Find me his mistakes. Jackie recognized the tone. It was the same one Brian used before dismantling a witness on the stand. What about your wife? Brian's smile was razor thin. Wana thinks she understands manipulation because she studied psychology. She's about to learn the difference between theory and practice. As Jackie gathered her materials, Brian's phone buzzed with a text from Alex. Can't make dinner tonight. Studying with friends. Another lie. Another orchestrated moment. One more thing, Brian called as Jackie reached the door. Get me the security footage from my house. Every minute Jack's been there. Every conversation. Every interaction. Of course. Jackie paused. Brian, they're not just having an affair, are they? This is something bigger. Much bigger, Brian agreed, his eyes on the evidence before him. They're trying to take my son, using my own profession against me. Parental alienation as a legal strategy. His laugh held no humor. They've forgotten the first rule of law. Never challenge someone who knows the game better than you do. As Jackie left, Brian began typing on his computer, his fingers moving with precise purpose. They thought they were playing a long game, using his son as a pawn in their elaborate scheme. They were about to learn that when it came to strategic patience and calculated revenge, they were facing a grandmaster. Mary and Hester paced Brian's office, her basketball coach's whistle swinging with agitated energy. I should have come to you sooner, she said, running a hand through her short gray hair. Something felt off about him from the first day he showed up at practice. Brian sat behind his desk, a digital recorder capturing every word. Tell me everything, Coach Hester. From the beginning. It started about 2 months ago, Marion began, finally settling into a chair. This guy shows up at practice, introduces himself as Alex's uncle. Jack something. Aldrich, Brian supplied, his tone neutral. Right. Said he wanted to support Alex's basketball development. Marion's eyes narrowed at the memory. Started showing up regularly, always positioning himself where Alex could see him. Making these little comments. What kind of comments? Brian asked, his pen poised. Subtle stuff at first. Your dad never played basketball in college, did he? Or must be hard having a father who's too busy for games. Always with this concerned look, like he was just trying to help. Brian nodded, remembering Jackie's surveillance photos of these supposedly casual encounters. How did Alex respond? That's what really worried me. Marian leaned forward, her coach's intensity showing through. Alex started changing his game, playing more aggressively, taking risks he shouldn't, trying to impress this guy who kept filling his head with stories about college basketball glory days. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos. I started documenting things. Dates, times, conversations I overheard. Something about that man set off every warning bell I've developed in 30 years of coaching. Brian gestured to the digital recorder. Would you mind sharing those details? That's why I'm here. Marian's voice hardened. Last week, I overheard him asking Alex questions about your cases, specific questions about your high-profile clients. When Alex seemed uncomfortable, he backed off, played it like casual interest. But I've seen predators groom kids before, Mr. Reese. This wasn't casual. No, Brian agreed, his expression darkening. It wasn't. Then yesterday, Marian hesitated. Yesterday, he made Alex really uncomfortable. Started asking about your home security system, your office setup. Said something about wanting to surprise you with a visit. Alex looked scared, Mr. Reese. That's when I knew I had to act. Brian leaned forward slightly. What did you do? I gave Alex a camera, Marian said firmly. One of those tiny ones we use to analyze player movements. Showed him how to hide it in his backpack. Told him if this uncle made him uncomfortable again, he should record it. A flash of approval crossed Brian's face. That was good thinking, Coach Hester. I've lost too many kids to adults who didn't have their best interests at heart, Marian stated flatly. I wasn't going to let it happen to Alex. Not on my watch. The camera, Brian said carefully. Does anyone else know about it? Just me and Alex. And now you. Marian met his gaze directly. I told him to trust his instincts. If something felt wrong, record it. No one would ever know. Brian stood, moving around his desk with deliberate calm. You've done exactly the right thing, Coach Hester, but I need to ask you something else now. Something that could help protect Alex. Anything. Would you be willing to continue observing? To let Jack think his visits are still under the radar? The camera was an excellent idea, but we might need more. Marian straightened in her chair. You want me to play along? Let him think he's getting away with it. For now, Brian confirmed. We need to understand the full scope of what he's doing. Every question he asks, every attempt to get close to Alex. Can you do that? Of course. Marian's expression hardened. But Mr. Reese, if he crosses a line, if he puts Alex in any danger. He won't, Brian said with absolute certainty, because you're going to be there. Watching. Recording. And if he tries anything, I'll have everything I need to destroy him. Marian studied him for a moment, recognizing the protective fury behind his professional demeanor. You're building a case against him. Against all of them, Brian corrected. And when I'm done, they'll wish they'd never heard the name Reese. All of them. Marian's eyes widened slightly. You mean? I mean everyone involved in manipulating my son. Brian's smile was cold. Every single one. Count me in, Marian declared, standing. I'll keep notes on every interaction, every conversation. And Mr. Reese, I'm sorry about your wife. Alex let it slip that she's been encouraging this. Brian's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. My wife has made her choices, Coach Hester. Soon, she'll learn about consequences. As Marian left, Brian returned to his desk, adding her statement to his growing collection of evidence. Another ally in place, another piece of the puzzle coming together. Jack and Wana thought they were being clever, using his son's basketball practice as cover for their manipulation. They'd forgotten one crucial detail. In any game, the best players weren't always the most obvious ones, and Brian had just recruited a valuable piece to his side of the board. The video played on Brian's laptop with perfect clarity, every word another nail in the coffin of betrayal. Jack Aldrich's voice filled the office, smooth and practiced. Your father's cases, Alex, the high-profile ones. He must have quite a security system at home to protect all that sensitive information. Alex's voice was hesitant, the hidden camera in his backpack capturing his nervous fidgeting. I don't really know about that stuff. Come on, kiddo, Jack pressed, his tone carefully casual. You must have noticed something. Security cameras, alarm codes. Your dad's quite paranoid about his files, isn't he? Before Alex could respond, Wana's voice cut in. Jack, remember what we discussed. Alex needs to trust you naturally. The recording continued, documenting their systematic attempt to extract information about Brian's cases and security measures. Each question was carefully crafted, each response noted. They thought they were being subtle. They didn't know they were documenting their own downfall. Brian closed the laptop as Wana entered his home office. Her smile faltered slightly at his expression. We need to talk, she said, closing the door behind her. Do we? Brian's voice was perfectly controlled, his posture relaxed. About what? About your controlling behavior, Wana declared, gaining confidence. About how you're driving our son away with your obsession with work, your constant suspicion. Brian waited, letting her continue. Each word was another piece of evidence, another crack in her carefully constructed mask. Alex needs a father who understands him, she pressed, her tone sharpening. Someone who can give him the attention you never could. I've been watching you push him away for years, and I won't stand for it anymore. Is that what you've been watching? Brian asked softly. Or have you been watching your careful manipulation finally bear fruit? Wana's expression flickered, a flash of triumph, quickly masked by concern. Is that what this is about? You're jealous because Alex has found a better male role model. Better. Brian's laugh held no humor. A disgraced lawyer who got suspended for misconduct. A man desperate enough to manipulate a child as a weapon against his father. You've been teaching our son to hate me. I've been teaching him to see the truth, Wana suddenly declared, her mask dropping, introducing him to his new dad. Isn't that fascinating? Brian remarked, his tone conversational. Go on. Say more. You're so caught up in your cases, your precious justice, she spat. You never saw it coming. Months of careful work, showing Alex exactly who you really are. Her smile turned triumphant. Now he can't stand you. Why aren't you angry? She demanded as Brian remained calm. Where's that famous temper you show in court? Because your lover doesn't know my son recorded everything. Brian replied coolly, opening his laptop again. And my lawyers have already prepared everything. I'm not just divorcing you, Wana. I'm putting you both in jail. The color drained from Wana's face as her own voice played from the speakers, documenting months of calculated manipulation. You've been sloppy, Corita, Brian said, his voice carrying the same tone he used when destroying witnesses on the stand. You left a trail. Text messages. Videos. Witnesses. Did you really think you could outmaneuver me in my own game? You can't prove anything, Wana whispered, but her confidence was cracking. Can't I? Brian stood slowly. Every meeting with Jack, documented. Every attempt to extract information about my cases, recorded. Every manipulation of our son, preserved. You're not just looking at divorce, Wana. You're looking at conspiracy, attempted interference with attorney-client privilege, and psychological abuse of a minor. You wouldn't dare, she challenged. Not to Alex's mother. The mother who used her psychology license to manipulate her own child. Brian's smile was predatory. The one who conspired with a suspended lawyer to access privileged information. That mother. Wana moved toward the door, but Brian's words stopped her. Oh, and Wana. Those trust fund documents you and Jack were so interested in. They've already been modified. New trustees, new conditions. You'll never see a penny of Alex's inheritance. This isn't over, she hissed. Actually, Brian corrected her, It was over the moment you decided to use my son as a weapon against me. You just didn't know it yet." As Wana fled the office, Brian returned to his evidence files. The confrontation had gone exactly as planned. Every word, every reaction had been recorded, adding to the mountain of evidence he'd accumulated. His phone buzzed. A message from Jackie Muller. "Jack just left his office. Heading your way." Brian smiled coldly. Perfect timing. He activated the office security system's recording function and waited. Jack would come charging in, thinking he was supporting Wana, not knowing he was walking into a carefully laid trap. The sound of angry footsteps echoed through the house. Brian counted silently. 3, 2, 1. Jack burst into the office, his expensive suit wrinkled from rushing over. "What the hell did you say to her?" Jack demanded. "Jack," Brian acknowledged calmly, not bothering to stand. "Please come in. We have so much to discuss." "You think you can threaten her?" Jack's face was flushed with anger. "You're not the only one with evidence, Brian. We've documented your neglect, your obsession with work, my cases." Brian interrupted smoothly, his voice as sharp as a blade. "Is that what you've been so interested in? Tell me, Jack, how many times did you pump my son for information about my clients? My security systems, my files?" Jack's expression flickered. "That's ridiculous. I was just being friendly, showing interest in accessing privileged information," Brian finished, leaning back in his chair. He opened his laptop and turned it to face Jack. "Would you like to see the recordings? Or should we start with the text messages where you and Wana planned your accidental encounters with my son?" "You're paranoid," Jack scoffed, but his eyes darted to the laptop screen. "This is exactly why Alex needs a better father figure. A better father figure." Brian's voice carried the same deadly calm that had made hardened criminals confess on the stand. Like a suspended lawyer so desperate for revenge, he manipulates a child for access to confidential case files. He pressed play on one of the recordings. Jack's own voice filled the room. "Your dad's cases must be fascinating, Alex. All those high-profile clients, sensitive information. He must have quite a setup at home to protect everything." Jack's confidence cracked as he heard his own words. "You recorded me. That's illegal." "In my house with my son," Brian said, standing slowly. "Everything you did was recorded, Jack. Every question, every manipulation, every attempt to access privileged information. Did you really think I wouldn't protect my home, my family, my cases?" "You can't prove intent," Jack argued, but his voice wavered, his legal training betraying his recognition of the trap he'd walked into. "Can't I?" Brian's smile was lethal. "Let's talk about your recent cases, the ones where you've mysteriously known your opponent's strategies, the coincidental timing of your meetings with my son, and your subsequent court victories." Jack's face paled. "You wouldn't." "Wouldn't what?" Brian's voice sharpened. "Report multiple ethics violations to the Bar Association. Document your attempted interference with attorney-client privilege. Press charges for conspiracy and exploitation of a minor." Jack stumbled backward, his carefully constructed plan crumbling around him. "Brian, we can talk about this." "We just did," Brian said coldly. "And now you're going to leave my house, my family, and my life. The next time we meet will be in court." His voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "And Jack, if you ever come near my son again, losing your law license will be the least of your concerns." As Jack fled the office, Brian sat back in his chair, surveying the evidence spread across his desk. Months of surveillance, recordings, documented manipulation, all leading to this moment. They thought they were playing a long game, using his son as a pawn in their revenge. They'd forgotten the most important rule: never challenge a man who had built his career on turning people's own words and actions against them. A man who, when it came to protecting his son, had no capacity for forgiveness. Alex sat across from Brian in his father's office. Back straight, eyes clear and focused. Gone was the rebellious teenager who'd been pulling away for months. In his place sat a young man who'd learned the hard way about manipulation and betrayal. "I need you to understand something, Dad," Alex said, placing his phone on the desk. "I didn't just record them. I played them." Brian leaned forward, his expression carefully neutral. "Show me." Alex pulled up a series of text messages, each one meticulously documented and time-stamped. "Every time Jack asked about your cases, I gave him just enough to keep him interested. Vague details, half-truths." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Just like you taught me about cross-examination. Make them think they're getting what they want." "When did you start suspecting?" Brian asked, pride warring with concern in his chest. "The basketball games," Alex replied, pulling up more evidence on his phone. Jack's stories didn't add up. He claimed to have played college ball at Stanford, but when I checked online, his name wasn't in any of their records. He paused, meeting his father's gaze. "That's when I started really paying attention." Brian nodded, recognizing his own methodical approach in his son's actions. "Tell me everything." "They thought I was just a stupid kid," Alex said, his voice hardening. "But I'm your son. I know how to spot someone fishing for information." He pulled out a small notebook filled with detailed notes. "Every meeting, every question, every time they tried to turn me against you. I documented it all." Alex pushed play on one of the recordings. Jack's voice filled the room. "Your father's cases must be fascinating, Alex. Sensitive information like that doesn't stay hidden forever, does it?" Alex's recorded response was perfectly calibrated, hesitant enough to seem genuine, vague enough to be useless. "I guess. I mean, he has some security stuff, but I don't really know about it." "This was 2 weeks ago," Alex explained, stopping the recording, "right after he started asking more specific questions about your home office. That's when I realized this wasn't just about Mom's affair or custody. They were after client information," Brian said, his expression darkening. "Not just that." Alex pulled up another recording. This time, it was Wana's voice. "Your father's biggest case right now, the Morrison trial. He must be keeping evidence at home. Files, recordings." She was using her psychology background. Alex continued, disgust evident in his voice. "Trying to make me feel important by confiding in me, asking for help in understanding your work." But she slipped up, started asking too many specific questions about your clients. "You gathered all this evidence yourself?" Brian asked, his voice even, though pride surged in his chest. "Most of it," Alex admitted. "Coach Hester helped with the technical stuff, showing me how to hide the camera, how to record conversations legally. But the rest," he squared his shoulders. "I needed to handle it myself, needed to prove I wasn't the weak link they thought I was." "You never were," Brian assured him, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "I played along," Alex continued, pulling out more evidence. "Let them think they were winning. Every time they badmouthed you, I acted like it was working. Every time Jack tried to play cool dad, I gave him just enough encouragement to keep going." His smile was sharp, reminiscent of his father's courtroom expression. "They were so focused on manipulating me, they never realized I was documenting everything." Brian watched as his son laid out months of evidence, text messages, recordings, photographs, detailed notes of every interaction. Each piece was carefully dated and organized. Each manipulation was documented with legal precision. "They thought you were a pawn in their game," Brian said, pride evident. "They forgot something important." Alex met his father's gaze. In chess, a pawn that reaches the other side of the board becomes the most powerful piece in the game. As they organized the evidence for the legal team, Brian watched his son work with methodical precision. They tried to turn Alex against him, to use his own child as a weapon. Instead, they'd forged something unbreakable, a father and son bound by loyalty and a shared pursuit of justice. The long game was over, and Brian and Alex had won. The courtroom was packed as Judge Matthews called the custody hearing to order. The tension in the room was palpable. At the plaintiff's table sat Brian Reese, his posture calm and confident, his team flanking him with stacks of evidence. Across the aisle, Wana and Jack Aldrich sat together, their lawyers whispering furiously. Judge Matthews addressed the room, his voice carrying the weight of years on the bench. This case involves not only a dispute over custody, but allegations of parental alienation, professional misconduct, and conspiracy to access privileged information. Brian watched Wana closely as the judge continued. She appeared composed, but her clenched hands betrayed her nerves. Jack, by contrast, was pale, his jaw tightening with every word. Viola Hardy stood, commanding the courtroom's attention. Your Honor, the evidence we present today will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendants engaged in a calculated campaign of psychological manipulation, not only against my client, but also against his minor son, Alex Reese. She gestured to the neatly organized files on the table. We will demonstrate how they conspired to undermine the father-son relationship, motivated by financial gain and personal vendetta. The first piece of evidence was Alex's testimony. Dressed in a sharp suit, he walked to the witness stand with confidence that belied his age. As he raised his hand to take the oath, Brian felt a surge of pride. Viola began. Alex, can you describe your interactions with Jack Aldrich and your mother during the past few months? Alex nodded. At first, it seemed normal, friendly. Jack would show up at basketball practice, say he wanted to support me. But then he started asking questions about my dad's work, about his cases, his home office. It felt off. And your mother? Viola prompted. She encouraged it, Alex said, his voice steady. She told me Jack was someone I could trust, that my dad didn't have time for me. She made me feel like Dad didn't care. Brian noticed Wana stiffen, her lawyer whispering furiously in her ear. Did you document any of these interactions? Viola asked. Yes. Alex pulled out a folder and handed it to Viola, who displayed the contents to the court, a meticulous record of text messages, recordings, and notes. One recording played aloud, filling the courtroom with Jack's voice. Your dad doesn't get you like I do. Alex, you can talk to me about anything. The jury and spectators shifted uncomfortably as the next recording played. Wana's voice, dripping with false concern. Your father only cares about his work, Mio. Thank goodness Jack is here to make time for you. Viola turned to the judge. Your Honor, these recordings, combined with Alex's testimony, establish a clear pattern of manipulation designed to alienate Alex from his father. Jack's lawyer attempted to object, but Judge Matthews overruled him. As the hearing continued, more evidence came to light. May Grant's testimony exposed Wana's misuse of her psychology practice, detailing how she manipulated Alex and violated patient confidentiality. Jackie Muller's investigation revealed Jack's attempts to access privileged information through Alex, as well as his prior ethical violations. When Viola presented the security footage from Brian's home, showing Jack entering multiple times without Brian's knowledge, the courtroom fell silent. Judge Matthews finally spoke, his voice grim. The evidence presented in this case is overwhelming. This court finds that Wana Reese and Jack Aldrich engaged in a calculated campaign of psychological manipulation, parental alienation, and attempted interference with attorney-client privilege. He turned to Wana. Mrs. Reese, your actions have caused irreparable harm to your son and your ex-husband. Custody of Alex Reese is awarded solely to Brian Reese. You will have supervised visitation only, pending the completion of psychological counseling. Then to Jack. Mr. Aldrich, your involvement in this case is not only unethical but criminal. This court refers your actions to the Bar Association for review, and I am recommending immediate suspension of your license, pending further investigation. As the gavel fell, Brian felt a weight lift. He glanced at Alex, who sat tall and confident, a far cry from the hesitant, manipulated boy of months past. In the aftermath, Brian and Alex began to rebuild. Together, they worked with Chris Houston, a family therapist specializing in cases of parental alienation, strengthening their bond and processing the betrayal they had endured. Wana lost her license permanently, her professional reputation destroyed by her own actions. Jack faced disbarment and criminal charges for conspiracy and attempting to access privileged information. Their scheme, once so carefully orchestrated, had imploded, leaving them with nothing. A year later, Alex stood on the podium at his school's state basketball championship, holding the trophy high. In the stands, Brian cheered with pride, surrounded by their closest allies: Hugo, Mary and Hester, Jackie Muller, and Viola Hardy. After the game, Alex approached Brian, trophy in hand. "Nice shot, kid," Brian said, smiling. Alex grinned. "Learn from the best." Brian nodded, his expression serious. "You've shown me something these past months. You've proven you're stronger than anyone gave you credit for." Alex's smile softened. "That's because I'm your son." Together, they walked out of the gym, father and son, their bond unshakable. In the end, Wana and Jack's betrayal hadn't torn them apart, it had made them stronger. They'd played the long game and won, proving that loyalty, justice, and love could triumph over even the most calculated schemes. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.